Hello, and welcome once again to Family Historian. My name is Stephen Conte. Tonight we are going to learn about the genealogical record sources of the Buckeye State, Ohio. And joining me on tonight's show, I am very honored to have as my guest a very lovely lady. Her name is Susan Simon. Susan is a direct descendant of one of the first families of Ohio. She is also a trustee of the Madison Historical Society, and she is the vice president of the Morris Area Genealogy Society. And on tonight's show, Susan is going to teach us how we can find our Ohio roots. And now let's welcome historian and genealogist Susan Simon. Susan, welcome to my show.
Hello, Stephen.
I'm so glad you are here. You know, Susan, I have never been to Ohio, but I've been through Ohio on a Greyhound bus bound for Des Moines, Iowa, and it was a torturous journey. I should have gotten off that bus in Ohio and stayed in Ohio where I belonged. Okay. Now, Susan, your family represents the quintessential all-American pioneer family because you did not start out in Ohio. Tell us about your earliest ancestor on American soil and who he was.
John Bissell, and he came from England, and he landed in Massachusetts, and we're not quite sure when he came. Some say he came in 1628, but we do know for sure that he was in Connecticut, Windsor, Connecticut, by 1640.
Right. Now, how many greats would John Bissell be to you?
He's my 9th great-grandfather.
So I have to say nine. I have to say great 9 times.
Yes.
I see. Okay. And we do have a photo of the Bissell home in Windsor, Connecticut. And around what year was this home built?
That home was built somewhere around 1640.
Right, 1640.
And he was the owner of a ferry that crossed people over the Connecticut River.
Right, and that was a big business he had.
It was a big business, and he also had it, well, it was in the family for one of the longest times a ferry has been in one family.
And the Bissell home is still standing.
Is still standing.
Isn't that something? And we also have a photo of his grave. And in what year did he pass on? Was that
1670?
1677. Right, and he was 86 years old.
Right.
So he was the first.
The very first one that we know of that came.
From England.
From England.
Okay. He was not a Mayflower.
No, he came after the Mayflower.
So in the 1630s, you would say.
Was sometime in the 1630s.
All right. Now, he had many descendants.
Right. And my, well, I don't know how many greats. I haven't gone back that to figure that one out. Joseph Bissell.
Yeah.
And then his son, Joseph Bissell's son, John Partridge Bissell, are the ones that moved on to Ohio.
All right.
They were in the Revolutionary War, and Connecticut was in sad shape. And Connecticut bought or owned the land that was from the Atlantic Ocean all the way to the Mississippi and beyond.
Right. You see, I never knew this until you came along, but many of the eastern states...
They owned that property all the way.
And what was it called? The Connecticut...
Western Reserve.
Right. And we have 4 maps to show you the Connecticut Western Reserve. First of all, we have a map of Ohio, and I have it right here. A map of Ohio. These Midwest states have many counties in them.
Yes.
Many, many counties.
But at that time, they did not have that many.
Right. And we're going to show you a map. Our next map is of the Connecticut Western Reserve. The actual journey that Susan's ancestors took in order to get to that territory, which we know as Ohio.
Right. It became Ohio.
Okay.
In 1803.
And another map here shows the actual Western Reserve. And what area did they settle in
They
Ohio?
settled in what is now known as Youngstown, Ohio, which is in the northeast corner.
Right, and this
of
was in the
Ohio. 1796 or 7 is when they did the survey.
Right.
And then they were able to move there afterwards.
And this was a father and son who
Father
went there.
and son's families.
I see. And you told me something very interesting, that you had a female ancestor.
Oh, yes.
And what was her name?
Hannah. Hannah, it was Joseph's, Bissell's wife. And she was able to buy on her own, and she was married at the time,
Yeah.
buy on her own property from the Connecticut Land Company. And it was adjacent to the property that Joseph bought.
Right. And she signed the deed.
She signed the deed. She owned it. And in her will, when she died, she gave that property to John Partridge's children.
I see. So in those days, that was very unusual.
Very unusual.
For a woman to be given that
Right.
privilege.
Yes, because in those days, the women couldn't own anything. It was all owned by the men, especially if they were married.
Right. Why do you think she was selected to
I
do this?
really don't know.
She was way ahead of her time.
Way ahead of her time.
And that was Hannah.
Hannah, she was Hannah Partridge.
I see.
And before she married Joseph Bissell.
I see. Hannah Partridge
Bissell.
Bissell. Okay. And around what year did she pass on? Do you know what year she passed on? It was in Ohio.
1819, I think, somewhere around there, yeah.
Right.
She
right.
passed on after her husband and after her son, John Partridge, passed on.
Right. By the way, what does the word Ohio mean?
Oh, it's an Iroquois Indian name meaning big river or good river,
Like the Ohio River.
the Ohio River.
I often wondered the name where
well,
that
I think
came
the
from.
state was named after the
Right.
Ohio River.
And when did Ohio become Ohio as we know it today?
Well, it became a state in 1803.
1803. So your family,
Was the very beginning.
the very beginning, and we do have a certificate showing that my fine guest Susan Simon was given this by the Ohio Historical Society, I believe, or
The Genealogical Society
for the first families.
for the first families.
And I see you are wearing a badge here.
Yes.
Very
I get
proud.
to wear it today.
Yeah. You don't wear it that often.
No, not very often.
And this will designate.
That I'm a member of the first families of Ohio.
Great. Okay. Now let's get to some research.
Okay.
And I know that Susan did bring with her. This is the Ohio Family Bible.
Right.
And the Bissells are all over the place in
Yes.
here. Okay.
Yes, I have 2 family Bibles that are Bissell.
And as you know, family Bibles are rare. If you find one, and you have 2 or 3 of these.
I have 2 for the Bissells and 1 for another.
So this
family.
is a real Ohio archive.
Yes.
Okay. And how did you find this?
Well, it came down through the family, and my aunt gave it to me. My great aunt had it, and then she gave it to my aunt, and my aunt gave it to me because she knew I was interested in genealogy.
Right. And it's very important to have a family Bible. And also, getting back to John Bissell, you are a candidate for Daughters of the American Revolution. Am I correct on that?
Correct.
Are you a member of that?
No, I'm not.
You have too many other clubs that you...
I'm sure I could do that because the way I got the first families of Ohio
Right.
was through Joseph Bissell and John Partridge Bissell, and they were both Revolutionary War soldiers.
I see. Now we're going to look at some of these wonderful pages in Susan's Family Bible. We're going to start with birth records, and she's going to read some of them, some of the very early ones, if you can do that for us.
Well, for births, and one of the interesting things on it is that they actually give where they were born, not just exactly the date of the birth.
Great.
So Columbia Humes Bissell was born in Porter County, Indiana, in June 20th, 1853. And
Let's do another birth record if we
Want
could
another
on the
birth
same
one?
page. Yeah.
Let's see, here's one. Sarah Jane Bissell, born in Reading, Hamilton County, Ohio, in October 29th, 1827.
Excellent, excellent. The record keeper was on the ball, the ancestor.
Yes, and that was in the other side, end of the state, down
Right.
in Hamilton County, which is right outside of, well, Reading is right outside of Cincinnati.
Right. Now, back to the Bible. How old is this Bible again?
Bible is 1850.
1850. Oh, my word. We have a museum piece right
Yeah,
here.
we definitely do.
Okay. And let's look at a few of the marriage records, Susan. If you can select one to read to our viewers.
Here's one this was my great-grandfather. Charlie T. Bissell and Fanny J. Clark were married in Ord Valley, Nebraska on July 19th, 1886.
So the family went from Ohio,
To Indiana, and then to Nebraska.
Right. But we're discussing Ohio this evening
Right.
because you are a descendant of one of those early
Right.
families. Yeah. Is research in Ohio, is it very easy? I know they have a lot of things there for the genealogist. And you said that you
Right.
used, Cincinnati has a wonderful
Well,
collection.
they have a library that I actually, well, when I started doing genealogy, you had to write letters.
Right.
You didn't get online and get the
Right.
information.
Right, right.
But I'd write letters, and some of the letters that I wrote were, you were lucky if you actually got into, someone handed it to a descendant.
Yes,
And that way you could get everything.
yes.
But in Cincinnati, someone had written some information about the family, written it up, and left it in the library there. And they sent me the information.
Right.
But the Cincinnati library is very good. A lot of historical things that are there. Also, if you belong to the Ohio Genealogical Society, they have a huge library.
Right.
And that library will even lend books out. And I did that in the very beginning. I borrowed like 2 books at a time, and they'll let you have them for 3 weeks.
Isn't that wonderful? And we do have a pamphlet on the Ohio Genealogical Society. It's a wonderful society to join, especially if you are an Ohioan or a descendant of
Right.
Ohio, as Susan is. And it's just a wonder. They have wonderful sources here.
Right.
Yeah.
They're very active. It's a very active society.
Yeah.
They have branches of it in every single county except one. The other thing about Ohio is that you need to go to the counties and go to the
Yes.
county courthouses.
Yes.
They have all of the birth, death, land records, everything that you would
In the
want
county
to know.
seats.
In the county itself, yes.
Right.
In
I
the
know-
courthouse.
I know several years ago I did a show on Iowa sources, and that is the essence of Midwestern genealogy. Everything is on the county level. Am I
Right.
correct in that?
Yes, yes.
And
A
so,
lot of it is on the county level.
what 2 counties were your ancestors in?
Trumbull County was beginning, is where it was the biggest of the county, that then divided into Mahoning County, which
Right.
is where Youngstown is.
Right,
And then Hamilton County, which is where Cincinnati.
right. But all of your major, and there are lots of major cities in Ohio: Cincinnati, Toledo, Dayton, the capital,
Columbus.
Columbus, which is the
Yeah.
capital. Do all of those cities have wonderful libraries and archives for the
Yes.
researcher?
And I would go through the libraries and the historical societies as well.
So you have the counties, the historical societies, and the local.
And the historical societies are great too for
Right.
getting information.
Right. Let's look at one more Bible record. Death records, the ultimate. We did
The
birth,
ultimate-
marriage, yeah.
Yeah.
If you can select anyone from the death records.
I'm trying to get, well, here's one. Gideon Brecount died in White County, Indiana on October 15th, 1876. He came from New Jersey originally.
Really? Really?
But he went to Cincinnati area, and then he went on to Indiana after to live with his children.
So you are really a pioneer descendant.
Yes.
And
Yes.
how did they? There were two ways of traveling in those days.
Well, a lot of them traveled down rivers,
Right.
if they could find the rivers.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
ones that came out of New Jersey, they spent several years in Pennsylvania and then Maryland, but they came down rivers if they could.
Yeah.
The ones up in the northern part of the state, they came from through New York State, through the rivers, and they used the Mohawk River.
I see. I
come
see.
down.
Right. And beside the river, well, the covered wagon.
The covered wagons.
And we have a covered wagon on our set tonight, right
Right.
here. And many of your ancestors were covered wagon.
Well, from Nebraska, they
Yeah.
went from Nebraska to Washington State, and
Yeah.
they used the Oregon Trail.
Yes.
And my grandfather is supposedly have walked beside the covered wagon on the way to Washington State.
Yeah. What were some of the reasons people went westward? We hear that saying, "Go west, young man." Is it in search of a better life or
Well, I
fortune?
think so. I think every time they seem to, like when they came out of Connecticut, it was after the Revolutionary War.
And they fought in the
And
Revolution
they fought
in
the
Connecticut.
Revolution in Connecticut.
Okay.
And so they moved because there was so much destruction to get a better life. And then from Ohio to Indiana, there was they were building roads and,
Right.
and setting up structure in Indiana, and they were being paid. So they wanted to move so that they could work
Right.
there.
Right.
And they farmed. They were all farmers. And then they went to Nebraska, and it was opening up. Nebraska was just opening up. I think they started every state.
They did.
Practically. The only one they didn't start was Washington State because that was already
And you were born
populated.
in Oregon, I
I was
believe.
born in Portland, Oregon.
But you have roots in Washington State as
I grew
well.
up in Washington State.
I see. Now, do you have any distant cousins who are still in Ohio? Was there one cluster of the Bissell
Yeah,
family that
no.
stayed in Ohio?
I'm sure there is, but I don't know any of them.
Right.
I haven't run across any of them. Even in my DNA hasn't shown any.
Right. So in other words, they were there from the 1790s in Ohio until about what year?
I would say, well, my direct ancestor left in 1836. But I know that there were others that stayed there.
There were.
Yes.
Okay. I know that you have been honored a great deal by the Ohio Genealogical Society. Is that correct? Or
Just for the
article that you wrote?
Oh, I wrote 3 articles, right?
And we have it right here.
This is the first one where the family was in Ohio in the Youngstown area. This is about the Bissells.
And can you read the title of this here? Ohio
The Crossroad
of Our
of Our
Nation.
Nation, Records and Pioneer Families. That journal is no longer being published, but they do have 2 other journals that they do.
Right.
And all of the old journals are online. And if you belong to the society, you can get into them all.
Right. So it's so much easier nowadays.
Yes.
As I think you and I are of the same generation of genealogists. We both are
Started out with
pre-computer. Now you
Right.
just press a button and you can do research on your lunch hour. It's so
Yes,
easy.
or in the middle of the night.
That's right. It's very, very easy. There is another source in Ohio, which I have looked into. It's the Ohio History Connection. I have one of their pamphlets right here. Can you plug this one? I mean, this is
Well,
great.
they have a lot of
And this is in Columbus,
right. This is
in the capital.
in
Right.
the capital.
Right.
One of the things that they have online is a lot of pictures too of what Ohio looked like, and they have also things that you can get through the internet.
I see, I see. Now, is it an actual building, the Ohio History Connection?
I think it's like a museum and
It's a
building.
museum. And do they have research facilities there as
Right.
well?
Right.
Yeah. And you said you have used this,
I have, but I haven't used them nearly as much as other resources.
like the Ohio Genealogical
Right,
Society.
and the libraries.
Right. Susan, what would you tell the beginning Ohio person? Like, say there's a person here in New Jersey or out west who thinks he or she has, where the family stopped off in Ohio.
Right. Well, for one thing,
Where would they
being
start?
in New Jersey,
Yeah.
you have one of the greatest genealogical
libraries
right in Morristown.
Okay.
The Morris Township Library is excellent.
That's
it
it's called the North Jersey.
North Jersey, and it's historical and genealogical.
Yeah.
And it's in the basement, but that doesn't mean bad things.
In the
That's good.
basement of the
Of the main library.
Morristown Public Library.
Right.
Okay. And what
And they
you...
have excellent sources for all over. I used it for the very beginning, and I got a lot of things out of Ohio there. Ohio, Connecticut, besides New Jersey, all New England, and it is a marvelous place to go.
In tracing your pioneer genealogy, Susan, you used Massachusetts,
Right.
Connecticut, and then the family went through Pennsylvania to get to Ohio. Is that
Right, and I didn't find out until just recently that I have Pennsylvania roots too.
okay? Fine. In the Bissell family.
Yes, they married into the Bissell family.
I see. And did some of those people stay in Pennsylvania on their way to Ohio, or
Yes, in fact, if you look at a map, you'll find that Youngstown, and they were actually in the section of Coatesville,
right? Right.
is right next to, just a couple miles away from the Pennsylvania-Ohio border.
Right.
So
right.
they would go. Sometimes they'd be in Ohio, and sometimes they'd be in Pennsylvania.
Right,
They would
right.
go back and forth a lot,
And then the family went to Indiana,
and then to Indiana.
where you have done some research.
Yes, and I wrote an article on that one too, because
In the same journal.
In the same journal, because they were from Ohio.
I see.
They were born there, and their children were born there.
Right.
So before they moved there in 1837, but he died very shortly thereafter. And she stayed there, and she bought more property, his wife.
Was this Hannah again?
No, this
Oh.
is Sarah.
Another. You had some very strong
Sarah
female.
Core. Yes, very.
And where did she buy property in?
She bought it right near where where he had bought the property. William is the one that moved with his family and Sarah,
Okay.
and they bought property, and she continued to live there. And then when her son, one of her sons, because she had several,
Right.
moved to Nebraska, then in her later years she moved to Nebraska.
Right. Right. Now, so you have your Ohio ancestors. Many of them are buried in Ohio.
Yes.
Okay. Have you been to their graves?
No, I have not.
But do you know where?
I know that they're in the Youngstown area.
Right. In the country area, is it very countrified there?
Well, Coatesville was, because that was a very farming community, but I think it's been taken over by Youngstown. You know how towns just sort of spread out.
Right.
And
right.
so I think it's only part of Youngstown now.
Well, listen, this has been a wonderful interview. Do you want to say anything more about Ohio? Maybe you can encourage our viewers with some Ohio roots. how easy it is in that state, and is it very genealogy friendly?
Well, I think that it is very friendly for Ohio. For a state, it tends to put a lot of things online. It tends to, I think that if you belong to one of the genealogy groups, you will probably find a lot of information, a great deal of information.
Right. So it's all there for you.
It's all there for you, but I think you have to go to the county courthouses as well.
Right, right. Well, it's so wonderful to have you as my guest, Susan Simon, historian and genealogist, and a direct descendant of one of the first families of Ohio, before Ohio became a state. And it was called the Connecticut Reserve.
Yes.
And it wasn't until 1803
that it became a state.
Our 17th state, I believe. So you were there before it became...
Before it became a state.
And in every election that we've had, Ohio is on the air as that swing state.
Yes,
that's your reputation.
Now it is, yes.
We keep our fingers crossed or uncrossed.
To find out what it's going to do.
We all depend on Ohio's final decision. Susan, thank you so much for coming on my show. It was a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Stephen.
And thank you folks out there for watching my great show on Ohio sources. And remember, as I say every week, remember, we are all descendants of ancient civilizations. Genealogy is your key to the history of your family. And so until next time, this is Stephen Conte wishing you the very best of luck in your research, and above all, happy ancestor hunting. Good night.